Yeah, one that's a widescreen up here. Oh, that's good if you want to see the screen.
Well, that way I can see the screen and they can see the speaker.
I heard they stole over.
I did not.
Let me get you there. This is my. You're welcome.
Okay. It's just these two.
Right now. Oh, Jason, you said we had some more.
I did not. This has been a morning.
It was a while, and I was on top of the roof along the drain units. And before we dove down, they had, I just, January.
Yeah, bottom rung.
This weekend.
It was good. Oh, sure.
Would you say short?
No, what about yours?
It was beast.
Is the part that you'll have to control? Keep being brave, they'll be there.
And what time is DC is February 12th through 17th. 12th through 17th. No, I will not. Without that.
Oh, just the fishes. Oh, 2008. Yeah.
And then they can do whatever they want to do. And that, we had, our phone is live.
Hello.
And all this been live streamed. So, that's good.
Yeah, we need to sign it. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Richardson, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Whit Gibson, the chair of the Scotland County Board of Commissioners. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting of the Scotland County Board of Commissioners to order. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda? I have a motion by Commissioner Ivy and a second by Commissioner BJ Gibson. All in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. I want to welcome everyone here to the Emergency Operations Center. We are here today for a special presentation by the local council of governments in regard to broadband possibilities and study that they've completed and just to learn what they have done and what they're recommending for the future. Want to welcome, I know we have members from the school board and the city council here, and we welcome all of you, and most of our commissioners are here. We want to turn it over to David Richardson at this time and let him impart great wisdom to us. I think there's a sign-up sheet that he's probably going to make an announcement. I think he's going to start that around. If you have not signed that, if you would do so.
Thank you, Chairman Gibson. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Richardson, for those of you who don't know me, and it's my pleasure to serve as the Executive Director of your Lumber River Council of Governments. And we're delighted to have the opportunity to work with Scotland County, Laurinburg, Wagram, and Gibson here in Scotland County on regional issues. For those of you who don't know, we work on a variety of issues, everything from aging services to workforce development to community and economic services, planning services to our local government. And we've enjoyed a long partnership with Scotland County and the municipalities here. And we're so thankful for the support that we get from each of you for the work we do at the COG. We're delighted this morning to be able to provide some results to you about the broadband demand aggregation study that we've been conducting in our 5-county region. The study has been going on for about a year and a half. We've been doing it through COVID, so it's had its challenges that I'm sure all of you have encountered in your daily operations as well. We know that broadband is a struggle throughout our 5-county area, and we really want to do the most we can to expand that broadband access and availability here within the region. Over the past year and a half with COVID, we've really learned all those challenges, all of those consequences, and really how important it is, from telemedicine to teleschooling. And with the study, we hope these will be the first efforts to help get you as elected officials and leaders within our communities the information and data that you need in order to make decisions to try to recruit broadband and support broadband within Scotland County. There's a lot of funding that's going to be coming out through the Great Grant initiatives and other programs through the bills that are coming through Congress and the General Assembly for broadband support. We're currently working on trying to get a training put together through the NC Bio Office, Broadband Infrastructure Office, to get some more details out to our members about that. We'll get that information to come out to you as well. We want today to be informative for you. Please feel free to ask any questions you've got. We're delighted that Jeff Brooks, who's been the consultant we've been working with ECC Technologies, is here today to do our presentation. He's going to talk with you, but we want this to be your opportunity to get questions that you have answered about broadband within the region. I will tell you, this is just part of the final result. We'll be getting to Kevin, to Charles, to the elected officials, to the school system, those who want a copy of it, a copy of the final report. We've got a draft of one component of it, and that draft is about 450 pages that we're going through. Now, that is for all 5 counties together, so the Scotland County parts are much smaller because ECC has been good enough to divide up a lot of the data on the county basis with the study, but we will be getting that over. We're anticipating having that final report where we can get it shared with all the GIS data and all the other information to you toward mid to late January. We've also been talking at the COG about ways that we can make that data more accessible. Some of you have heard about the portal we're developing on our website for our members with their water and wastewater issues. And we've already started some internal discussions about, can we use that to try to make some more of this broadband data available to our members for their utilization as well. At this point, I'm going to ask Jeff to come up and turn the morning over to him, and he's going to present the results of what we've seen so far. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Brooks. I'm with ECC. Thank you, David. Thank you, Sonia. Both David and Sonia worked really hard to help us get ready and allow us to be here this morning and meet with you. So I appreciate all the work that they've done. As I stand up here, I've been vaccinated and boosted, so hopefully I'm not endangering anyone in the audience. I appreciate the heat being on.
Can you stand closer to that mic because this is being broadcast and they will not hear you unless.
Can I slide it this way a little bit? Now, that could be bad because I could be rolling up and down the. David and Sonia know that I do wander, so I'll try and be aware of that. So anyway, so as David said, any questions are welcome. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer. And we'll get an answer back to you. I've got plenty of business cards to hand out. My contact information is at the end, so please feel free to ask your questions, call, write, email, as it may be. So I was given detailed instructions on this, so we'll see. Yep. So the other thing that I don't do is I don't read slides. I hate to sit in a meeting and somebody read to me what I can read for myself, and I think you have it in front of you, and you also see it behind you. Again, if there's something that is of particular interest to you, then just throw your hand up and we'll stop and we'll talk about it. So kind of the way that this presentation is laid out, I want to make sure that each of you have a very basic understanding of broadband, so that whenever we have conversations and you have conversations with providers, with funding agencies, at least you have the very baseline of what somebody may be talking about. So not going to be technical, not going to be in depth. I don't think I'm qualified to be technical or in depth, as case may be, but we'll use that to set the stage. We'll also talk about the scope of the project, what we are working on in terms of objectives for Lumber River and for each of the counties. We'll then drop into the inventory and infrastructure components. These are where our outside plant people actually went out into each of the 5 counties to look at the infrastructure that's available in each county. And then we'll talk about what your residents told us about broadband. We call that voice of the citizen, voice of the county. And it's whenever you take that information and you begin to overlay it and you combine that with other information, you start to at least get a picture of what the situation is within your county. Now, you, as the leadership within a county, you understand things like roads, sewer, landfill, health department, funding libraries, working with the Board of Education. You understand those things. They're complex and expensive issues that you deal with every day. And what's happening is broadband is becoming an increasing part of what you also deal with every day. And as I've said to most of our county clients, I would guess that either in person or virtually over the past year and a half, I've probably been in front of 100 counties. Prefer, as you maybe can tell from my accent, to be in front of North Carolina counties, but I've been in front of counties ranging from Florida up to New York. When we have these meetings in front of county commissioners with county managers, or in other states they may call them county legislators, we begin to hear that most counties, rural counties, have exactly the same issues, exactly the same problems. You're dealing with education issues, you're dealing with economic development issues, or retaining businesses. You think in terms of small towns with their main street being boarded up. So you're having to deal with all these things. The fancy word is you're dealing in many cases with depopulation. In other words, to use real world, which I like to do, people move out because they think there's going to be a better opportunity somewhere else, maybe to raise a family or for work, for educational opportunities. You deal with, I'm trying to remember the word, economic disenfranchisement. In other words, many people in rural counties are poor. I grew up on food stamps, child support, free lunches in the school. So I speak that language. That's an issue for many of our rural counties, is how do you even get to a standard of living that makes sense for a resident in that county? We're dealing with healthcare. We're dealing with educational issues. The fundamental of all these things is that counties are facing increased requirements to deal with these issues, but the money doesn't always flow behind that. So now you have a situation where you're having to make decisions on how do I do more, providing services that cost me more to provide, yet the federal government or state government may not be as forthcoming. And locally, I can't raise taxes, can't raise them much because we can't afford it. So broadband, I wish it would, but it doesn't solve all these problems. But broadband does create an opportunity to maybe tilt this game just a little bit so that you can begin to at least address some of these issues in a different manner than maybe we've done in the past. I think I'm just about through with everything. I'm probably about ready to take questions. So, I think I just said that. So this is the education part, and we'll do 4 slides in one. So really, all broadband is the concept of getting data out of a computer somewhere else to your computer or your device. Broadband means we get it there faster. So if you go back in time, I've got a whole bunch of old visual aids in my attic, but I only bought a couple. Way back in time, this was from the mid to late 90s. This is nothing more than an analog modem, and it would move data around at 56,000 bits per second. So it's important to understand what a bit is and what a byte is. So my name is Jeff, Jeff, that's 4 characters. The computer folks like to sit there and say that a byte, B-Y-T-E, is about equal to a character. So my name is 4 bytes long. Okay, reason why that's important is because that's how, whenever you say, hey, am I storing my photographs or files on a computer, on a device, it's generally recorded in characters. So you may have a picture that's 1 megabyte in size. It means it takes 1 million characters to store that picture. Have something that's 10 megabytes, is 10 million characters. But the way data moves is reflected in bits. And so you see these 1s and 0s up here. That's because computers are inherently stupid. A computer knows 2 things. It knows on and off because it's run by electricity. So it takes 8, I guess you say, instances of something being turned on or off, or bits, to make a byte. So my name might be, J might be, I don't know, 1010, and then E is 1011. The reason why that's important is because whenever you're looking at broadband and you're comparing it to other methods of moving data around, it's always expressed in megabits. How many millions of these little 1s and 0s can you move in a second? And broadband today is widely considered to be 25 megabits per second and up. Now, that sounds like a lot. Sounds like a whole bunch. But remember, in the moving of all this data, you've got good old overhead. kind of like traffic, also kind of like directions. So if you think about driving your car on the road, you may be able to get on, 74 or 401 and just go straight until you hit traffic, until you have stop signs, until you have traffic laws, until you have things telling you which way to go. All those things clog up the transmission of data, and consequently, where you say, oh, Spectrum says I can get 200 megabits. Yeah, you can, but you know what? If you're lucky, you get that, but 150 megabits is getting sucked up and running the network, whatever else may be going on. So that's a great slide. So the next slide says exactly the same thing, except in a different way. And that says exactly the same thing in a different way. And now we're moving on to why we did this project. So fundamentally, what the COG did is they looked at what were going to be the economic drivers for the region. And they considered broadband to be one of those primary drivers. And so David and the board sat down and they said, let's make sure that we don't get left behind because there's an increasing amount of funding. Oh, I guess that's for me wandering, right? I'm sorry. Wow. Beam me up, Scotty, right? So we've done these types of projects in multiple counties. And so we believe that we had the degree of expertise necessary to support the goals that the Council of Government had, which is obviously what we're reviewing with you today. So I think I've got great slide, pretty picture. Am I doing something wrong now? Okay. So you can come back and look at that later because, again, I don't want to belabor pictures to you. 3 components to this project. We talked about this early on. It's taking a look at the citizens, the residents, what they're telling us. It's taking a look at the infrastructure. And it's also comparing this data to what the federal communications and other agencies are saying about broadband within the county. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that's a critical component of what we're looking at. Yep. When you see North Carolina bio, that's the Broadband Infrastructure Office, just so you know. So what I want to talk about first is, let me ask this, are there any questions so far? Okay. So I want to talk about the components of a network. And what I tried to do was to compare that to where it made sense by thinking about transportation. We're all familiar, obviously, with the road system. So within building out networks, you're going to have a backbone network. The backbone carries the most traffic. It's the biggest part of the network. It's the highest performance, highest speed. So I sort of consider that analogous to an interstate highway. Then whenever you're maybe getting off that backbone, let's say you're getting into like a city, for example, you're getting into Laurinburg, or maybe you're getting into Lumberton or Rayford or something like that, you're probably not going to have that big highway anymore. You're going to have a smaller road, maybe a secondary road of some sort. So that's called a distribution network. It literally is taking signals that are coming from that backbone. It's beginning to distribute those out to different places where the network needs to go. And then whenever we get to the really small areas, like going to a neighborhood or serving an individual road, that's called a lateral network. Again, it's even smaller. And then you're going to have what's called a last mile, or a drop, or a last mile connection, where I get cable or fiber or a wireless connection coming directly to my home or my residence. If you think in terms of fiber optics, fiber's made up of strands. And if you think about a backbone, there might be 144, 288, or even more strands of fiber in a fiber cable. Think about a distribution network, there may be 72, 48. Lateral, there may be 4, 8, 16, 24, just to give you an idea of the magnitude in terms of the different components of the network. So what we did is we wanted to go and see what facilities were available. And there are 2 reasons why you do an inventory. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons, and there could be all kinds of justifications. But I believe, in my opinion, there are only 2 reasons. Number one, I want to know what exists in an area so I can identify gaps. I want to know where there are physical gaps in a given county. And the reason why I want to know that is because I want to sit down with my incumbent provider, whether it's a cable company or a telephone company, and say, look, I know you have your maps. I know you have your GIS files. I know you keep it all very proprietary, and I understand that. But we know where you aren't. And because we know that, we want to know what you're going to do to help close that gap. What can you do physically? What will you build? What will you invest in? And we'll talk about that toward the end a little bit about some of those strategies. The second piece of this is to be able to go to an alternative provider, somebody that's not your incumbent, and say, look, we got these gaps. We know where the incumbents are and aren't. We think we have an idea that there's some assets that you may be able to use. What would it take to have you come into our area and help us out? Now, as Charles knows, even that doesn't always work. I know he had a project a few years ago where they said, look, we want to expand some broadband, and we're going to roll the red carpet out for you. And the provider walked in on the red carpet, and they kind of hung out a little while, and then they turned around and they walked right back out. Very frustrating. And just between you and me, I know the provider, and the provider just didn't put in the effort that they should have put in. Now, at the end of the day, with all these providers, they have to be shown that there's going to be a return on their investment. So one of the things we do with our clients is we always sit down and we talk about the money, because you're spending your money, you're spending taxpayers' money, or you're going to get grant funds and you're expending those, or you're being an overseer of funds. But it helps if you understand the financials of your service provider, that you understand what it costs them to provide service, to build network, to operate on an ongoing basis. For example, provide 24/7 customer support for somebody who wants to call and hook their television up to their Wi-Fi network, $3 a month per subscriber. Just a rough industry average. But you have to take care of all these little calculations, run through those in your mind so you understand. So when you sit down with that alternative provider, say, look, I got an area that's got 25 homes in it. I got 25 homes, and it's $50 a month is what I'm going to build, and it costs me this to provision it, and this to serve it and support it. I have this many truck rolls. You do the same thing today when you think about running a water plant or running trash trucks or the equipment that's at your landfill. You're doing exactly the same thing, and that's what we want to always help you understand when you're having these conversations with service providers. So this map simply shows an overview of what was driven within the 5 counties. The way this process works is we will go out to each of the counties, and we would have come to Scotland County. My GIS manager, Jeff Holtman, would have spoken to you and said, can you give us GIS information? Give us map information. Any infrastructure that you have, we're happy to take a look at, and we make that the starting point. We then go out to other third-party providers that we've worked with in the past. We've been able to validate their data, and we buy data for the county from those folks, and we overlay it on the GIS data that you gave us. We then go to the FCC, and we take their maps, and we overlay it on top of the mapping data we've put together, and we devise what we call a drive plan. And that drive plan specifies where our outside plant people are going to go to see what assets, what fiber infrastructure there is in the county. Generally, fiber providers will follow the same routes. And you know what they are. If you go out and you look at a utility pole and you see a big, thick cable on it, you might go another few miles and you're going to see a second big, thick cable, because that route's already proven. The poles are in good shape. The easements are okay for someone to use. So we always expect to see people following the same routes, and the drive plans reflect that. The way the process works, the outside plant person will go to the starting point in the drive plan. They'll literally get out of their little car, they'll walk over and they'll look up at the fiber or look down at the pedestal, identify what the fiber is, try to identify to the extent possible who the owner is, get back in their car, drive about 300 feet, stop, do it again. When they're doing this, they have a big notebook and a whole bunch of colored pens, and they'll mark these maps up. And then they also have electronic devices. So with the electronic devices, they'll take a picture of it. It automatically records the lat long where they are. If there's a barcode there, they can scan the barcode and pull information off of that. So we have two ways in which we're gathering this data as we walk through the process. We do not go into incorporated areas. We will look, for example, let's say in terms of Laurinburg, we'll identify where fiber is coming into the city, and we'll identify where fiber is leaving the city. When you come into incorporated area, you literally are usually getting out of the truck and you're walking, especially in the downtown areas and more populated areas, and it's just not cost effective to do that. So this is an example. As you can see, these are just like a single page from 4 counties from the map books. And so you can see where they've scribbled up here and they've got different things colored. It's important to note that when they're driving these routes, one of the things that's most critical is to be able to look up or look down at a pedestal, look up and see an intersection. So if fiber's going this way and I'm expecting it to go that way, and then I see a splice point and I see new fiber or new cable, that's important because that infrastructure was not known to anyone before. So what will happen is we'll mark that point, and then the outside plant engineer will turn left and ride that fiber all the way down to wherever it terminates. Go this, whichever way it goes, we're going to note that down. And now whenever you get the GIS information back from us, because we'll return to you all the GIS information, you'll have all of the fiber routes mapped, including any new fiber that you weren't aware of. The only thing we don't do is we don't do the laterals. So for example, if I have fiber that goes to a neighborhood and I can see where that fiber is at the neighborhood, I'm not going to go into the neighborhood and drive it. We're looking for the availability of the infrastructure to support the expansion of fiber, not for whether each individual house has fiber or fiber connection or a last mile connection or not. Again, the reason why that's important is, and I'll make this up, I don't know. Let's say that we knew right here that we were saying there was no coverage here. But I might see that there's fiber here. So I'd go to my incumbent. If they own the fiber, I say, look, I see you have fiber here. What are you going to do? Or it may be, I see there's fiber here that somebody else could use. Would you be interested in using that fiber? The reason why that's important is because if I'm trying to expand service into a new area and there's fiber there that's backbone fiber or distribution fiber, I don't have to take the time to build new fiber. It's already there. So I can go buy some of that fiber or rent some of that fiber, and I speed up my deployment rather than if I had to build all new fiber.
Are you making the assumption that if the fiber is coming to that neighborhood, that everybody in that neighborhood ultimately will be able to connect to that?
Yes. Yes. There are caveats there that we'll hit in just a minute, but yes. So when you look at the infrastructure, the first thing that you're thinking in terms of is, okay, how about my incumbents? And I have 2 types of incumbents. I have my incumbent local exchange carrier, or ILEC, and I have my cable TV or cable provider. So if you look within the county, what we're starting with is what are the territories that are covered by the incumbent local exchange carrier. So you can see in your copy, it's probably a little more visible than this, and in the full-size report that you'll get, electronic or otherwise, it'll be even more visible because these colors are a little mushy. But this looks like CenturyLink, Windstream, AT&T. So if you look at the next slide here, this is telephone company fiber. So if you see a dashed line, it's buried fiber. And if you see a solid line, it means it's aerial fiber. And it looks like AT&T's in the air here and here. It looks like Windstream, maybe AT&T, are underground in some of these other places. The other thing that you see is you see little dots that indicate the central office. The central office is nothing more than a building that's secure that's housing the computer equipment that runs the telephone network. It's going to have generators, battery backup, uninterruptible power supply, because the phone system for traditional analog phones powers the phone in your house. Unlike if you get your phone from cable TV or the new style phones where you have to provide the power. So what happens is the current telephone plant, copper-based, what we call POTS lines, plain old telephone service, is that base shrinks this becomes, rather than being the hub for your traditional telephone service, now it's becoming the hub for electronic services. The owners of these central offices are redeploying the central offices to support all the electronic equipment, all the data movement that we associate with voice over IP and other internet-based services. In some cases, there are telephone exchanges outside the county that are providing support to Scotland County. So these telephone exchanges don't always match up with county lines. So if we kind of step up and we're in the world of data now, let's talk about DSL, Digital Subscriber Line. It's a technology that's been around for about 25 years. So within the county, you can see where DSL is available. Now, DSL requires two things. Number one, a POTS line, an analog line powered by the phone company central office equipment. And number two, it requires a decent amount of proximity to that central office because digital signals just can't go so far on copper wire. When you look at this, you're going to say, wow, look at that. 200 megabits, we talked about bits. 200 megabits right there and right there over DSL. It's not happening. That's what the phone company reported, but DSL will not support transmission speeds at that rate in Scotland County. They may do it in a lab where the units are this far apart, but in the real world, it just doesn't happen. Each carrier files with the FCC every 6 months what's called a Form 477, where they tell the Federal Communications Commission, these are the data services that we offer in Scotland County, and here's how fast they are. Here's how many megabits per second they are. And CenturyLink, or AT&T, but usually CenturyLink, is telling the FCC, oh, right here, look how fast we are. That would even be broadband speeds. Just doesn't happen. You can come back and you can read what the residents said in Scotland County. How fast is your service? It ain't that. I'm telling you right now, it is not that. There are a variety of reasons why things get reported like this, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But fundamentally, DSL is considered to be a narrowband service, along with dial-up, cellular hotspot, satellite. All those are considered to be lower speed services. And people in Scotland County are using dial-up, satellite, DSL. So the issue is, and we'll talk about this at the very end, think about content. Think about video education. Think about telemedicine. Think about these applications. These technologies are simply not robust enough to support those technologies. Not fast enough, so if you want to use that verbiage. But this is the starting point to say, where is DSL within the county? Looking at fiber, this is Spectrum's claimed coverage area, and this is their fiber. Now, the reason why, make sure I work this right, when you look at phone company fiber, cable fiber, what should stand out to you is that you don't see a lot of fiber from either the phone company or the cable company beyond these primary routes. So at some point in time, it's going to be what's called hybrid, where your data signals, whether it's you're on the phone, whether you're browsing the web, whether you're watching a movie, whether you're in class, are going to go from fiber over to copper-based carriers or technologies. Now, for coax, it's not quite as severe as it is with the telephone company. Twisted pair, which is what she's about the phone company, are very small wires, and their physical capacity to move data just isn't very high. Coaxial, by its nature, has more capacity, and consequently, most coaxial services are considered to be broadband. So just think in terms of that. Another thing that people ask us about, and we've done projects, relate to fixed wireless. And this is different from cellular. It's different from satellite. Fixed wireless, in essence, is putting a radio and antenna array on a vertical asset. Could be a commercial tower, could be a water tower, could be the side of a barn, whatever gets it up in the air, and broadcasting signals from that. Little receiver, and I looked for one last night. I couldn't find it. A dish goes on the house, might be about that big. Fixed wireless delivers broadband, probably anywhere between 25 and 100 megabits in what's called a multi-user environment. In other words, I have one antenna that might serve multiple people. Isn't bothered by rain, unlike satellite. No latency, unlike satellite. However, you got to have, in most cases, line of sight. Now, there's some frequencies that are used that are lower, that don't require line of sight. Television is a great example. Cellular telephones are a great example where those waves will penetrate. But generally in the data space today for fixed wireless, the frequencies that are available to be used require usually line of sight. So here in Eastern North Carolina, we're famous for our pine trees. Pine trees not only present foliage issues, but also are highly reflective, which makes it difficult to push a radio signal through those trees to deliver broadband. Oh, but I guess I could. However, we identified these sites that could be used as part of a hybrid solution. And I know we had, when we did the meeting, I think it was a couple of months ago at Lumber River, we like to have different vendors come in and not talk about what they sell, but talk about the technology. We had Radwin as a provider of fixed wireless equipment come in and talked about their role as being part of a solution to deliver broadband. So if you look at these fiber assets, when you look at the map pretty close, I can't really point them out here because they all kind of run together. There are organizations that own fiber within the county that could be used as part of a broadband solution. So one of the things to think about when you look at this fiber and the applicability of fiber is if I'm building a fiber backbone network, I'm going to spend probably somewhere between $50,000 to $60,000 a mile to build that network. Now, it gets a little less expensive when I get down to the distribution fiber, a little less expensive when I get down to the lateral fiber. If you think about a drop or a last mile connection, I'd say on average for me to go from a pole to a house, maybe say 200 feet, probably $1,000. But I know in this area, Lumbee River EMC is one of our clients, for example, and they used to have some drops that were $4,000. So if you think about a $4,000 drop, divide that by $40 a month for service, you can see it's 100 months to recover just the cost of the installation, unless you were to bill the customer for it. But what customer can afford $4,000? One of the key things I want you to read when you get the report from David, I want you to read the comments. In every one of these reports that we do, we ask for respondents to say, tell Lumber River, tell Scotland County, what do you think about broadband? And you will consistently see, well, I called Spectrum and they said it was going to be $12,000 to give me fiber to my house. Who can afford that? Well, nobody can. Nobody can afford that. Now, one of the reasons why that happens is you will see somebody says, well, wait a minute. I see that big old cable right there, and here's my house, and I have maybe a 500-foot, winding road to get to my house and my barn. Why can't I get it? Because that's distribution cable. I've got to come all the way down here to the box where my electronics are to where I can hook you up. And now I have to come all the way back and pull fiber all the way back down here to take it back to your house. So I can't always just hit that cable and run it right here. There are otherwise some things involved. To me, it's important that you know these things and that even after we meet, if you have questions, call us. We'll help you any way that we can. We'll, define things for you. We'll give you examples. We'll also give you resources that you can look at to learn more about this, because when you're in these conversations with these providers, you want to be as well equipped as you are when you're dealing with roads and sewer and those sorts of things. Because your constituents are going to say, well, I don't understand why this costs $12,000. So the more you know about why we think it costs $12,000, the better off you are to go and ask CenturyLink. You justify to me why it costs $12,000, especially when you're asking me for money. I got the wrong map there. I'm sorry. I will fix that and send that a revised one to Lumber River. There's supposed to be some census blocks up here, but we've got census blocks in one of the maps coming up. These are what are considered the underserved areas. Now, let me make a point about this. The FCC today is defining areas in each county that are considered to be unserved and underserved. Underserved is less than 25 megabits. That's the dial-up in the DSL and the hotspot in the satellite. Okay, unserved is I got no service. Unserved is not an adoption issue. It's not I can't afford it. It's not I don't know how to use it. Unserved means I can't get it. According to the FCC, this is all done by census block. If there's one house in a census block that's served, the entire census block is considered to be served. So if you have a scenario where right here, I'll use that as an example. Let's say those roads are indicating a census block and one house in that census block is served, the whole census block is served. It doesn't matter that across the street, somebody can't get it. Yeah, that's unserved. I understand that. But, oh, no, that's served. So part of this, there are two pieces of this. Number one is whenever you're working on these issues, new grant guidelines are sitting there saying you can have up to 10% of a census block be served, and it's still considered to be unserved. It's still going to be eligible for grant money. And the other thing is, you're going to find whenever you apply for these or you're working with a service provider, the fact that you can go out into the county and say, hey, let me talk to you. Are you really served or unserved? Literally, we did some grant applications in northeastern North Carolina where CenturyLink challenged the applicant and said, well, no, we got this covered. You can't get a grant there. We literally went door to door and wrote down, and we had 550 some odd people said, nope, we got no service, and 2 said they had service. And we won the appeal because that's what it took. The primary work allowed us to get the money and contradict the FCC data. This map shows recent grant awards within the county. You'll see, for example, here, you'll see SpaceX. These are RDOF awards, Regional Digital Opportunity Fund. This program was in place about a year ago. It was a reverse auction that was performed by the FCC. And the way it would have worked is that, let's say this is a census block right here where I got the little remote control at. The FCC would have come and said, for that census block, we think it's going to take $3,000 to deliver broadband service to each residence in that census block. So I would have shown and said, great, I'd like that. I'd like to get $3,000 from you, FCC, to build network to provide broadband into that census block. Well, CenturyLink came over here and said, well, no, I can't let them come in there. I can do it for $270 because these were done in increments of 10% and it's reverse auction. So CenturyLink came in round number 2 and said, oh, FCC, we'll do it for $270. Windstream came over here and said, oh, we'll do it for $240. So now what happens is you either have an incumbent provider that is bidding down because they know they have the resources and the infrastructure, perhaps even contiguous service areas, where, oh yeah, anything we can get is better than nothing. So I'll do it for $200 or whatever it may be. You have an alternative service provider that's desperate for business, and so they're going to keep trying to get this grant because they think they at least can kickstart and get something going and then come back and be whole on the back end. The FCC said, you've got to build your network in 6 years. We'll pay you whatever you want per household over a 10-year period. We want to make sure you're going to stay in business that long. So these are the RDOF winners in the county over the auction that just ended. However, with all the ARPA money coming out and the infrastructure money coming out, there are some providers that are vacating their RDOF awards because the new awards that are coming out, the new flow of money that's coming into states and counties for broadband is less restrictive, less onerous for these providers. And so in some cases, they're vacating their awards, even willing to pay penalties. Now, so far, as of a couple of weeks ago, nobody in the county had vacated their awards yet. So what this means is that SpaceX is saying, you know what, we'll serve here and here and here, and that little bit there, and that little bit there, and the federal government's going to give us X amount of money in order to serve those areas. Yes, ma'am.
What mechanism does the federal government have in place to avoid duplication of services? When I think about the Broadband report, I know the school system, we was recently contacted by AT&C to support a USDA reconnect program in Scotland County. So will there be any way for us to monitor duplication so we can work in tandem together?
So that's a great question. And the Reconnect Award, the Reconnect program's been around for about 3 years. It comes out of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's about $1.2 billion over 2 years. But it was really the first national broadband program that came out following the FCC's CAF program. It's a very competitive award program. We've won 3 for clients, and they're now on the 3rd program that you're talking about. And the final report that we give to David we will give you an example of the federal data reporting requirements for Reconnect, just to give you an example of what the government looks for. We want to reconnect for Madison County in New York as an example, and it's about 800 hours worth of work for the ECC team, and probably a corresponding amount for the county, for Madison County and their service provider. So specifically to your question on the Reconnect or on other grants, the first thing that you want to do is to see, because I'm assuming that the service provider is going to look and say, hey, have we already been awarded? Is this a grant eligible area? Because if it's not grant eligible, they shouldn't even be bothering you. But part of what they do on Reconnect awards, there's a big part within those requests for data where they're saying, show us that you have support within the community. So if you got county support, Board of Education, community colleges, anchor institutions, banks, hospitals, libraries, that sort of thing. And all that goes into the application as qualitative components of that application. So you can do that. I'll be happy to send you some links. If you want to email me, I'll send you some links to show you where you can track that.
But I guess what I'm saying is that the school system, I know I can't commit my county or anything, but I want to make sure that I'm working in tandem with my county for what they do next. I want to make sure I don't do anything that will not cause us to have a strong application depending on what they do next.
So the question is, do you have like a broadband steering committee as part of the Scotland County government? Or do you have a cohesive city-county committee? You know, some counties do, some counties don't. You know, and I think part of what David was going to do in working with the county was to make sure we're all galvanized together so that the right hand and the left hand know what's going on. And ideally, this data helps you in terms of being able to focus in some of those areas. Yeah.
Working on a digital inclusion plan that is being developed. Part of that plan, there's a list of stakeholders to be involved with that. Mark Ward shared a draft with me last week. Do you think the school system is one of those partners that are listed, Dr. Grant? So Mark gives that information. And I will also tell you part of the data that the government is helping develop.
Because we want to see, is there a disproportionate relationship between my household income level, and the only 3 that we look at, versus whether or not I have a certain type of service. We also look at a multivariate question, and that is, for example, how many people are in your household, what's the educational level within the household, and who's the primary user of these services. So I may say, you know what, I didn't have any problem with people working from home. I did have issues with school, and I look over here at the primary user. I only have 3 people in the household, but the primary user is an adult age 25 to 65. So again, when you read through these statistics, think in terms of interpret them in such a way that really helps what you're trying to do and not just read them as they are. Ooh, here we go.
Maybe a little different question. Is the purpose, I would think the purpose is try to provide broadband to every resident of the county. I'm assuming that is an unrealistic expectation.
No, I don't think it's unrealistic. I think that you have a scenario when most counties we think in terms of is universal service, as many people as possible, versus cost-effective service. Cost-effective service is only going to come when you have more than one provider. So what happens is invariably in this work that we do, virtually every county where there's more than one provider, end users are more satisfied. They're paying less money. They're getting better technology delivered to them, and they're getting better support for billing issues or technical issues. Can you balance the two? Maybe, but most counties end up defaulting to, we want as close to universal service as possible. Now, universal service is going to have some nines attached to it. Is it 99.999% of the county residents? You know, what about if you're in a rural county and if you think about how critical broadband is becoming to agriculture? So maybe I've covered 98% of the residences, but I've only covered 70% of agricultural buildings. Okay, I mean that's a big issue because you may have a large farm where you have a chicken house that's maybe a mile off the main, and it's another livestock area or whatever. Then you may have a scenario where if you think in terms of you have your farm implements, you have a tractor, for example, that needs broadband in order to handle the plowing issues and the seeding components. Or you may have broadband requirements to assess, soil acidity, moisture in the soil, the chemicals in the soil, do that sort of thing. I know we went up to Halifax County, I guess it was last year. We were working on a pilot project with them to put sensors, little fixed wireless stations throughout their property that would come back and then shoot back to the house. And the house had a broadband connection in order to be able to go back and forth, and do this stuff in real time. So universal service is important, exactly as you described, to make sure we have it not just for us as people, but also for the things that we do for a living.
I know that during the time when our schools were not operating in person, we needed for kids to be able to access the internet for educational purposes. And we just had areas within the county that did not have that availability.
Right.
It seems like when you're talking about piecemeal contracts to provide whatever the apparatus is, the fiber to bring something online, and you're doing it in small sections, then obviously they're bidding based on what's most profitable. There are going to be some areas that it's not going to be profitable because the cost of providing it is so significant. It seems like it might work better if somebody were to take over a larger part of the county so they get the profitable areas, and yet to get that, they have to be willing to take the less populated areas to provide the fiber to.
It's a great point, and we'll make that when we close this out in a couple of minutes. Every county that I work with is like Swiss cheese. So you have areas that are adjacent. I don't know how cheese is done, like these triangle things, So I got these areas where they're adjacent. Big chunks are adjacent to each other. So that's great. It's easier for me to extend infrastructure. But then you have to come back and say, well, what are you going to do about these holes? And so in my mind, it becomes an if-then. Well, because as you see, they're going to come and they're going to hold their hand out. They're going to say, Scotland County, what are you going to do for us? And you're going to say, well, I may do something for you if-then. So if you can help me here, then we may be able to have a conversation. But we'll show you that in just a second.
Maybe a similar question, and you can answer that in a minute. But if you've got an edge part of your county that's obviously near the border of your county, and there may be a municipality just across the line in another county, I would assume that those two can be linked together by a provider in order to provide service. If you look at the north part of our county, there may be something just off that, in Richmond County or Moore County that they could pull off of to provide it there. I would assume there's nothing prohibited.
No, and that's an advantage of what the COG brings to the table, because they're thinking not only in terms of individual municipalities and counties, but also regions and interregional work. I think that you're bringing up a great question, because the more you guys understand these various components, understand what makes sense, what's logical, what you can do, what you can't do, then the better equipped you are to make decisions. Those are great questions. I hid this. As promised, census blocks. So we talked about this. I'll just show you. This is where your responses came from. You know your population density intimately. I don't. We don't. So you can look at this and say, oh, it makes sense that we got a few up here because there aren't many people living there. We got a lot down here because we got a lot of people. And understand that if you think in the incorporated areas where there's probably going to be service, it's not just availability. There were questions in this assessment where we think in terms of adoption. If you don't have it, why don't you have it? And I think we'll show you that in a second. This was the home page. I'll just make a note that Sonia worked really hard to get images for me from all the counties because we want to make sure that the website had pictures from where we are. So in different places throughout, each of these went to a home page for each of the counties. And within each of the counties, you had your own set of pictures. So if you recognize the homepage picture, that's great. If you don't, it came from here. So just so you know. So another thing that whenever we lay out the project plans for each of these counties, having done this for a number of years, this does not happen unless you're involved. And in this case, Sonia and Erica got very involved with each of the counties. They produced collateral. We set up, it would have been, I think, Sonia was at scotlandcountybroadband.com was the URL. So each county had its own unique URL because if I'm in Scotland County and I'm participating in this, I'd rather type in Scotland County Broadband rather than, hey, tell me about broadband.com or whatever it may be. Local is very important. They worked on putting together these little cards for handout. There's a QR code. If I snapped a picture on my cell phone, it took me straight to the Scotland County BAT website. COG did flyers. We actually circulate these among other counties to show how you should do it, how you should be engaged in doing this work. Even extending so far as the work that we're doing in Illinois, Florida, and New York right now. We actually sat down with those folks because they said, "Oh, well, we're in Albany, we're in the capital of New York, and we'll send an email and they'll take care of it." No, it won't. So every county in New York has been looking at these to understand how do you build collateral that's going to get somebody's attention, how it makes sense. That's a great slide, so I hope you enjoy it when you read it. This shows you our daily site visits. So whenever we do this, we can always tell when Sonia and Erica and David work with the counties to do something because you'll see those little spikes pop up. Now, this is everybody. This isn't just Scotland County. We got hits from, as you would imagine, not only in Scotland County and the Lumber River area, but also from North Korea, Iran, Russia, China. I don't think they took the survey, but they may not have broadband either. I don't know. Over 10,000 visits, over 26,000 pages were viewed. So that's really good for a rural area. This is the graph I was alluding to earlier. Almost 3/4 of our respondents took it via their cell phone. Generally, it's half and half, 50%. So you guys blew it out of the water in terms of making this available from a mobile perspective. We see the browse and the operating system that's used. Here's where all the traffic came from. And again, this is across the whole site. And this is the time that people spent on certain pages. So you see Scotland spent 5 minutes, 56 seconds on the survey page. Our average is 5:45 to 4:45. And so you sit there, well, wait a minute, I took that survey. It seemed like it took longer than that. But I understand there are people that may start it and then get off the page. They answer one question, they're done. Or the only question that was required was your address and do you have service? And maybe they failed. Maybe they didn't know their address or whatever. So that took like no time. So if I see 5:56, that actually tells me that folks in Scotland County took the survey actually took a little bit more time to think about it and think in terms of their answers. We had 426 assessments coming out of the county. And this is an example of comments. And I don't know which county it was. Let's see. I feel the county should provide service to all residents. Oh, isn't that funny? I feel the county should provide service to all residents. Most counties that we talk to do not want to be in the broadband business. But tell us what you think. And this is what I think. Spectrum would not offer this. Seniors who can't get out. It'd be really nice to have more internet options. Just we really want to get some decent internet services. Please read those comments. I think they're very illuminating. Sample questions. So what type of internet service do you have in Scotland County? Fixed wireless, a big number. 32% of your residents have service that they had fixed wireless. Cable, 35%. A little concerning, you have don't know. We used to put a question on there would say, if you answer don't know, can you watch 2 movies coming over the internet at the same time and it all works perfectly. But people really struggle with that question, so we took that out. We thought, well, we just won't work with it, won't use that one. Can you purchase the speed of broadband that you need? This is a little higher than the other counties in the region. So I don't know and know 48%. So again, but you can look and see where the clusters are, and the clusters are going to tie back to being within city limits or near city limits where cable infrastructure is going to be in play. Why don't you have internet service? It's not available. Again, we didn't get many responses here, but you can see where it's scattered out. You got a few where it's too expensive. You got a couple other choices there. Trouble working from home. Have said, yep. You want to have trouble with school. High percentage there. Again, the gross numbers kind of take away from the fact that the percentage is high because you just don't have that many respondents that are coming in. So a couple things to think about as we sort of want, well, let me ask this. Any questions so far before we kind of get into the last part of this? Okay. So with the advent of grants, more and more grant money, this is kind of the simple equation that service providers are using. I will tell you from conversations with Spectrum and CenturyLink and AT&T, haven't really spoken to Windstream probably in 4 or 5 months about the county. These folks all have projects planned in Scotland County. They're budgeted in every county in the COG region. They got projects. They're budgeted. They're on the drawing boards. In some cases, they have preliminary construction prints done. Most cases, they've evaluated easement issues. So there's a project in play, and they know how much it costs. So what they're trying to do, their governmental affairs folks are saying, well, where can I get some money for this project? So through North Carolina Great Grant, through ARPA funding, through Reconnect, through RDOF, through the remnants of any other program, where can I get some money? And because they're the incumbents and they do this everywhere, they have an idea of what they will get through this process. So they've got some money they're going to get. They already know they're going to invest money. So there that number is. So there's the difference. What's the shortfall? And this kind of comes back to your question a little bit. What do I need in order to get this project moving? In some cases, it's financial, and in some cases, it's internal to their politics at the company. For example, Spectrum will tell you, well, they may not tell you, I would hope they would, but they'll tell you point blank, say, look, we're getting compared against every other project in our state, in our region, in the eastern part of the country, nationally. And the more places that we get local support, the higher our project grades out. So we had one county that we worked with where Spectrum told the county, said, look, if you'll kick in $4 million, we'll get this project built in 2 years. But if you can't commit to $4 million right today, then if you'll commit to $3 million in 2022 and $3 million in 2023, we'll get most of this project built, but it'll take about 3 to 4 years to get it done. But the hand's out. So this is what we're seeing in terms of how service providers that are your incumbents are approaching broadband. Now, to answer your question, CenturyLink or AT&T doesn't really care about the county boundary because that commonality of infrastructure will extend across political divisions. So it may be that if whenever you're looking at this and you begin to have the conversations with your service provider, which we want you to do, we want you to talk to them, say, well, tell me about Moore County. Okay, tell me about Hope County. Tell me about Robeson County. Tell me what you're doing in these other counties. What are you doing in South Carolina? What are you doing down in Bennettsville? Is there a place where these networks begin to come together and assimilate? And what's our piece of that and how does it benefit us? And then when they have their hand out, this comes at if then. Well, you think about you're asking for some money here, and that's great, but our goal is universal service. So what will you do for us to help close this gap where I have 3 people on a road that don't have service versus where you've got 500 people that are contiguous to where you already have network, but you have purse strings. So the other thing that because you think in terms of North Carolina that, you got to kind of walk a tightrope, and I'm not an expert on this. I'm just saying from sitting in all these meetings in terms of what the county can and can't do. in terms of what the city can and can't do, but you also have to think in terms of what you will or will not do. I know I was in Johnston County, I guess it was a couple months ago, and we've had kind of an ongoing relationship there. And one of the conversations I had with the county commissioners was, as soon as you make a decision to fund this, very second you do that, it's not quite as obvious to people as building a road or repairing a road or replacing a bridge or repairing parkland or expanding sewer capability or making the landfill work more efficiently. This is a little bit different. So somebody's going to pop right up where you have that open forum and say, well, why did you spend it on broadband and why did you spend it there for those people? Because there's only 3 people on that road. There's 20 of us over here. Why you do something for us? So there are all sorts of implications that you guys understand from what you do in terms of perhaps appropriating money for a service provider. We talked about this, the fill in, the unserved versus the underserved. So just some points to think about. Again, this is all in the handout. This plays into that when you think in terms of competition. So you got single provider versus multiple provider. Again, what's the goal of the county and where are you going to put your money? We do not see counties across the country that are our clients investing in multiple service providers. We see counties, should they choose to make an investment or to encourage, like she was talking about, reconnect grants or grant applications where universal service is the goal. Just a little bit of information about the technology. We alluded to this earlier, but this is just something to think about. If you're putting your money in, you're investing county money, taxpayer money, into a project, just think in terms of how this gets used. And I'll give you an example. There was a client of ours that invested in expanding DSL within the county. This was down in Georgia. And what they found is they funded that for a local telephone company. It wasn't one of the big telephone companies. And DSL was expanded, became more widely available, wasn't universal available. And the use of the internet outstripped the ability of the network to carry it. It's almost like you built a road too narrow for the amount of traffic that ended up on the road. If you think about education, for example, today we have Zoom and we have all these little boxes, on the terminal and on your monitor, you're trying to see what's going on. Well, that's not where it's going to be in the future. In the future, you're going to have a camera that's going to paint somebody's picture right there, and you're going to see them walk around. It's happening now in areas. It's not quite holography because some of the physical media required for holography, but that's the way it's going to be. I'm going to telemedicine where I'm going to turn my knee around and say, this thing really hurts. Let me see the back of it. Let me see you flex it. And because it's a 3D view instead of a 2D view, that's taking bandwidth. Just think about this. If you're investing, think about what the future applications are going to require. That's why in a lot of these grant things, you're seeing a minimum requirement of 100 megabits times 100 megabits rather than 25. And think about the fact it isn't what you see, like movies and stuff like that. It's also what you send. I think we're on camera right now, so it's what we're sending out, what you're sending out to the residents of this county. And think about the amount of detail required in order to make that a reality. I think we kind of talked about that. We've got finals that'll be due to the county before December 31st. And I think that's it. So I will show you, I forgot these. I'll pass them around. The Ethernet cable, localized to be used. Single mode fiber, but there's actually 2 fiber strands in here. All right. And this is going to carry 100 times what that single cable carries. And I'll just let you compare. So went a little long. I'm sorry about that. But I'll take any questions. I hope this was useful. Everybody seemed to stay awake. But I'll take any questions anybody has. Yes, ma'am.
You said you want to keep everything simple, so I'm getting ready to ask a simple question. If someone came to the city inquiring about the broadband, we don't get it. What they're living is the sand hills. When they come, we refer them that this is not city. There are 2 different entities of services. I want to make sure of that. If they live in the same hill and they came to the city, we ought to send them to the county. Or it's not related to us, or are we interconnected?
Are you providing end user services? Okay.
Not the,
But even in the city, we don't provide service to the home. All we provide in the city is the schools, county, city, and then our industrial use.
So,
It
so,
wouldn't be city or county.
so,
It's private.
Okay,
so the response to that, if,
Once, someone that lived in the same hill came to the school system and wanted to know why they didn't have, the service there because, they can't get anything, so they came to the school system wanting for them to justify or why they could not get any internet service.
I think this kind of comes back to what David was talking about in terms of the digital inclusion plan and the fact that the region and each county are trying to figure out the correct path. And that sounds like it's not very action oriented, but you have to decide as a county the role that you're going to take when your residents ask you these questions, because it's not a publicly provided service like a road or sewer or that sort of thing. And I know I will look at some of our clients and I'll look at the county websites and they'll say, okay, well, if you're in the area, you need these services. Here are the services that come from the city. Here are the services that come from the county. And then here's who you can call for these services. So here's going to be, Lumbee EMC or Duke Power, Progress, or whatever the name is this week, so forth, so forth, so on. So you have a mix of public and private service providers. The question is, however, if you think in terms of traditional telephone service and power and that sort of thing, those are mature industries. They're out there, been around for 60, 70, 80, 90 years. What is the county's role? Because we're speaking in terms of Scotland County. What is the county's role in terms of making this information available to its citizens and publicizing it? So when somebody asks that question, what's the possible response? Yep, we believe that there's service in these areas and this is who you would call. Or, no way, Jose, but we're working on it. Here's what we're doing. And then the county is going to decide the role it wants to take. We have a county where I talked to the county executive, and I think it was like a 40-second conversation. Mr. Brooks, I understand what you're doing. That's great that you're doing that. We have no interest in this. Click. And that was that. But his economic development director for the county was wildly enthusiastic because he was talking about all the needs and that sort of thing. So it really depends on what you're going to do as a county. I mean, it's not something we can tell you. We can share with you what our experience is. But the county becomes the natural conduit for providing information to a citizen. So if somebody's living when I was growing up, I always called it out in the country, and I want to know what was going on in Stanley County, which is where I grew up. Today, I would go to the Stanley County website and say, hey, what do I see? Part of this is going to be you as a county galvanizing all the resources at your disposal to help advance what you're trying to do. So getting your economic development folks involved, making sure your hospital and your medical providers are explaining and understanding the value of broadband, getting the Chamber of Commerce involved to make sure that they're providing feedback and getting information back. And then you've got to decide, does it make sense for us to kind of lead this effort or should we follow this effort? So I'll pick on Rick Hester at Johnston County. They've decided that they kind of want to lead the effort. So consequently, the county's setting up meetings with service providers. The county's putting out requests for proposals. Say, hey, we've got these gaps. You propose to us and tell us how you would close the gap. We may or may not have funds to invest because you don't want to sit there and commit to it. But let's see what your solutions are. So those proposals come in. You have 6 different people telling you, this is how we would solve the problem. Well, now you have the benefit of 6 different points of view, and now you're more educated to determine, hey, what do we want to do? But when somebody comes in and they ask you, well, what are you doing? This is what we're doing. It takes years to build a road. It may take years to get to where this is advanced. And, everybody talks about internet, but unfortunately, it didn't happen overnight. It takes a little bit of time and effort.
Yeah. Let me clear some up that you were talking about in your presentation. The city went out, it's 2015, 16 with ECC. They did a study on our network. From that, we went out for an RFI to find a WISP provider. And just kind of to do justice to the guys we went with in Skyrunner out in the West, we moved forward with them and then found out there was a local group a local list that we ended up on. So Skyrunner graciously just kind of bowed out, and felt like it would be better to go forward then. And since that point, we've partnered with Carolina Broadband, which is the local group. They utilize our water towers to provide wireless service to citizens in the area. So it's not, Councilman Evans, what you're asking, it's not through the city, it's through the separate private group. We let them use our water towers. So we try to, the competition is good and there's not a lot of it in the community. So that's, I just wanted to clear up.
Okay, thank you.
Skyrunner didn't, they graciously had to bow out because we went through an RFI process, went with them, then after that, found out that there was a local group.
Good, okay.
We did partner with them.
So, but you think about even that dialogue. Would that group be interested saying, hey, let's go on some county-owned assets? You know, an opportunity to do that. Would they be able to go and apply for a grant for equipment build out? You know, now they may not serve the whole county, but it may be that they're able to serve pockets. So they would need to say to you, you know what, if we can get 40 subscribers in this area, we'll be profitable, we'll cover our costs, we'll have support costs. Great, that may be worth backing or figuring out how you get support for that type of situation. And coming back to your question, it may feel like it's piecemeal. Maybe piecemeal is what it takes early on as opposed to having a big comprehensive build out. You know, it would be nice if somebody would come and say, you know what, we'll do the whole deal. Most counties that we deal with, that doesn't happen. You do end up with this thing where it's different people that are putting these programs together.
And I will say, one of the assets that y'all really have here in Scotland County that a lot of the counties in the state, the localities in the state does not have, is that the city of Larnborough is grandfathered in, where they can do more with broadband infrastructure and internet infrastructure than a lot of local governments can do. And I think that can be a real asset to you because you've got more flexibility with Larnborough being grandfathered in. Because right now, the General Assembly has a lot of restrictions in place on what counties and cities can do when it comes to owning broadband infrastructure. I know it's an issue that both the association and the league have been pushing for some years to have some of those restrictions lifted. I know there was a push in the last session of the General Assembly with all this ARPA money to come in. Those restrictions are still there, but they put more money into the great grant and applications. And that's one of the areas I really think our local governments can make a difference in. It's talking with those internet service providers, leveraging some of that funding that's coming through that great grant program to really help expand that broadband and helping providers work through that. So I think the results of this study are coming at a great time because part of what I know some of those providers who have struggled doing in the past is being able to show, because of the FCC data, that particular census blocks are really eligible for the great grant because of the way it's written. Our hope is with the data here, you can counter that argument and show we've got the results here that shows it's not there. So that's part of our hope of what we've done with the results of the study and way you as the county, you as the city can use that information to help support providers in those applications.
So one other thing I would encourage you to do is to talk to Lumbee. Lumbee has a significant fiber network throughout its operating area. And they have been a longtime provider of internet services through Blue Wave, but that's mostly been in Robeson County, a little bit in Hope County. But they have fiber, a significant amount of fiber all the way up here within Scotland County. So you might talk to John Dyson, who's their director for fiber at Lumbee, and say, hey, John, are you guys having any conversations about bringing service up here or utilizing your fiber to support another service provider? Spectrum, AT&T, and CenturyLink would not use their fiber, but ATMC might, other service providers might. again, you're going to accelerate the availability of broadband access whenever parts of the network are already in existence and they don't have to be built. If I'm applying for a grant, I can include my acquisition of somebody else's network assets, the usage of that in my grant application. It's called an indefeasible right of use. I might be able to go to USDA or whoever and say, look, I'm going to use part of Lumbee's network, and that's going to cost me $2 million. And then I'm going to build another $8 million worth. All that gets included within the grant application. So it really is a financial advantage and a timing advantage to be able to get another participant. And that's why looking at the fiber, looking at the existing infrastructure is so important.
David, I guess my question is, this money that's coming available, is it up to the providers to apply for the funding?
The way the Great Green applications are written right now is it does have to be provider to apply. A lot of the providers will reach out to the local government to try to get letters of support, letters of commitment from the county government. I know Spectrum has reached out in the past. I know AT&C has reached out. They have reached out a lot about Wayne and Robinson. They have started to reach out about Scotland. I had an initial meeting with AT&C. I guess it was a year and a half ago, right as we were starting the study, wanting to know about some broadband data that we had at COG at the time we hadn't had any. And they had reached out because they were looking at doing an expansion into Robinson County coming across to get across the river. They are a telephone co-op that is based in Brunswick County. They've done a lot of work in Brunswick and Columbus County. A little inflated. I know they've worked with them on a digital inclusion plan. They've worked with Robinson. I think they're working with you of yours here in Scotland on this digital inclusion plan. Related to Star Communications is a big provider there, so they've done a lot of work there. They approached us at the COG about a letter of support for Great Green application targeting the Aura area and parts of Fairmont. They were successful with that application, and from what we're seeing, the contacts and follow-ups we've had with them and our board members on the ground, they're starting to really see that work get expanded. So I'm very positive comments from the work they're doing as a local service provider. I do think that is a key. I think getting broadband out into our community is working with this local providers or local organizations to get them out, because we don't have the population density across the region for the big guys. We want the big guys to do everything they can and do it, but the way we got electricity in our rural communities was with the Rural Electrification Act passed. We got our electric co-ops, and that's how it works here. And quite frankly, I think that's a model that has worked. That's likely a model that is going to have to be followed again to really get it out. We want the big guys here. We want them to compete. We want them to provide services as well. We want anybody that can provide affordable, reliable broadband here. As a local government, I think providing support to them with applications. I know at one time there was encouragement for the counties. Kevin, you may know more about this, about setting aside some of your ARP funds to do some matches on some Great Green applications or matching money for some work that the General Assembly was going to do. I know there were some questions about whether you could really do that because of what the ARP response was saying. I do understand on the federal level there has been a recognition of some of those restrictions on the ARP. So the House is currently considering a bill to lift some of those restrictions and move forward. I do think in North Carolina we are at a disadvantage when it comes to broadband because of some of those restrictions on cities and counties being able
to help build out an home infrastructure and really, bring it back. When I talk to my colleagues, the COG directors in other parts of the southeast, they've got counties and cities that are doing like Larnberg does, and it's successful, or their COGs are able, in Kentucky, there's several COGs that are actually the internet service provider for their region as an alternative to the private market. Now, I'm not advocating for the COG to become the internet service provider. We're happy to provide that planning or education there. But I do think in the rural parts of the state, that's going to be one of our long-term challenges. And I think that's why the association and the league are trying to work so hard on getting counties and cities more flexibility in working in the area with those struggles.
But do you know, I think Robinson County just did their letter of support for AT&T. Did they vet out other companies, or was it just, they just look at them, maybe they should inspect them?
I know Spectrum has requested in the past. Spectrum has got, in Robinson County, Spectrum has got a lot of other opportunities. They've got RDOF. I think they got a reconnect grant for part of that work that they are doing. I will tell you, the COG has done a letter of support for AT&T for several grant applications that they've done in the county. That initial meeting that I had with them, they said their challenge getting into our region was getting across the river. And once they got into the river, they were looking to expand out into Oak in Scotland and eventually Richmond, out with it. Kind of the approach I've taken at the time with companies asking for letters of support for broadband. We do the research, we make sure they're legit, we hear what the feedback is from other areas they're doing. But if people are, if it's a viable company, if it's a company that's providing good service, broadband's important. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't care who's providing it as long as we can get it provided. And so I'm willing to do whatever we can to help whatever companies we can to get it. Because I think one of the things you're going to see in a lot of the comments, and I want to say, I have started reading the draft of that report that Jeff has said. I was telling Commissioner Gibson before we started, it's about 455 pages for the 5-county area. Each county, I think, is probably around 75 or 80 pages. And when you start reading those comments, a lot of what you hear is we need competition. That's one of the things you heard Jeff talk about, is competition to get better responses. So in an ideal world, we can have 2 or 3 providers. I think that would be phenomenal. Because as a whole, we've got an issue with access, but we're also going to struggle. The new tier ratings from the state came out. Robinson County is number 1 with the most economically depressed county in the state. Scotland is number 2. Oak and Richmond have waited. Oak is our best, and I think we're 22nd. So when you're looking at 5 counties as a whole, we're a very economically distressed area. So we're going to also have that challenge if we can get the access out there and having an affordable product that people can provide. And I think history has shown what helps drive down costs is competition. So the more competition we can have, I think reaching that universal accessibility for affordability is going to be that next challenge we've got, and making sure people can afford it. Because a lot of the responses you'll see is, I can't afford it, and that is going to have to be something I think that the feds and the state are going to have to figure out. Is it like the basic telephone access program that has been around for years for SNAP recipients, for food stamp recipients, where they can get reduced phone service. Is there a program that can be put in place to get that broadband access there? Because once we get the accessibility, then we've got to try to deal with that. Did that answer that, Charles?
We have a resolution today, Kevin, for ATMC.
From ATMC, it's one of them. And with that, is there a practical limit on, different companies you can support for, great grants? Because the county's not placing funding to any of them. And the areas that on the map that I've seen that they're requesting for are currently outside of the service areas of Spectrum. So,
There's probably not a number that you can support any and all, but like David said, as long as it's a reputable company.
yeah.
And I think, I don't see a problem with that yet. I don't see a problem doing that, and I think when you're looking at the Great Grant, part of the limitations on the Great Grant, and I think the Great Grants are great. That's a little weird to say. I think they're very well intentioned, but part of the problem I think we're going to see with the Great Grants, and part of why we've done this study, is some of those limitations with those census blocks that are eligible, because there are those specific eligibility requirements with service, and when they designed those Great Grant maps, when you talk to somebody at the NC Bio office, the State Broadband Infrastructure office, they'll tell you, we know that these maps aren't legitimate. They'll go ahead and tell you, the only data they've really got to rely upon is FCC data. So you have to prove that an area outside contradicts. Jeff told me a story one time that I love, about they had helped a county do an application for a grant. One of the incumbent providers came in, and with their study results, they were saying, well, we serve there, it's available. And with the responses they had in that particular census block, it's like, what, 600 or something? And the incumbent was saying, we're providing it, well, we've got 600 people that say you're not doing it. So either you need to provide it to them or let this application go forward. And they bowed out when they saw it. So part of it is helping to arm our local governments so that you can also arm those providers with that data. And, we'll get all this data. We're going to get GIS maps. We'll get all of the raw data at the top that we will share. We've got to figure out the technology part of how we're going to get that shared to all of the counties. That's part of why we've been talking about hosting our portal and seeing if we can, that we're developing for water and sewer, and seeing if we can put some of this GIS data. We'll be able to manipulate it with the GIS data, really zone in to specific parts of the county we want to look at and see.
David, thank you for all that you do, and we look forward to getting access to that information. Maybe not all 500 pages of it, but it's got more Texas stuff in there. Mr. Brooks, thank you very much for your presentation.
But Commissioner Gibson, I do have a question. During the presentation, Jeff mentioned the county having a steering committee. A comment was made that there's a digital inclusion survey or something that Mark Ward's working on. So who would get the steering committee together to make sure the city and the county and the schools are kind of on the same page and working together? I mean, especially since the city, we have.
That would be part of the conversation that we're having a little bit later. Talking about going through because AT&T was also talking about helping with the digital inclusion plan, and one of the aspects is a local steering committee that would have to be formed, and Laurinburg, the schools, the county, the hospital, probably St. Andrews, our larger institutions would be invited into that series.
So that the county would do that.
I would,
said that
I would think that we jointly do that.
I told Mark we would be willing to help support whatever initiative.
We will, I said, for those very shortly, and then the board of commissioners will come back together at 1:30 to address a couple of these issues before we go into a closed session. So unless there's any other comment that needs to be made, I will entertain a motion that we recess until 1:30.
So moved.
Have a motion by Commissioner Gibson, a second, I believe, by Commissioner Call. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. We are recessed until 1:30. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning.
I got time to go home.
You're alive now?
We are. We will call this session of the Board of Commissioners meeting to order. Those of you who may have been with us earlier, we went till about 11:30 and then recessed until 1:30. We have several items on the agenda, and then we will ultimately, I believe, go into a closed session. Next on the agenda was, I think, Mr. Johnston and Mr. Patterson talking about a commissioner's deed. Which one?
Property that you had to add the city on to.
Oh, that's, yeah, the Zacchaeus folks. Basically, it's a glitch in one of the tax deeds that needs to be corrected, and the city has agreed to do it, and just a matter of this board approving that as well. Just to make a minor revision to correct what we thought was being done initially. Zacchaeus property transfer.
Okay, on what piece of property is that?
It was a
Right.
property tax foreclosure. I think the city of Laurinburg's name was left off of it because they answered the response in it, so.
There was nothing exceptional about this, or some technical error that we need to fix.
Correct.
It's
This,
just an oversight, and Zacchaeus is going to bear the expense since they did it.
it's just adding the city of Laurinburg's name to the deed.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
From Mr. Ivy, second. From Commissioner McCall, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Mr. Patterson, vaccine incentive program.
Okay, the program is going well. To date, we have, ordered just under $90,000 worth of cards. We've been doing them in allotments, not knowing exactly how quick we've been able to do them. We did run into one bar where the bank, we took longer to get them from the bank. But that program is still going. But with that, we put two caveats on there for a December 31st and an end date, for an end date as well as funding. Right now, they're still in, I think it was $375,000 for the original funds. And right now we've used about 90 of that. So would ask if the board would want to extend the deadline of that past December 31st for the vaccinations. If the board would extend that till March.
Well, we'll have to get them used.
Yes, otherwise the program just terminates as we run out of this.
Yeah, I know.
Well, no, but you haven't used, you haven't ordered 300,000.
No,
He's
no.
ordered them in smaller batches.
Yes.
You allocated 375, but how much have
We've purchased 90,000, approximately 90,000.
the first time?
cards.
Okay.
Well, I think you've done them in 15,000 increments.
Yeah, $15,000 to $20,000 increments.
And we are giving them to folks who go and get their booster.
Yes.
Any
And,
vaccination.
For COVID.
Yeah, any vaccination for COVID,
Yes.
because two before
I
the
got
booster.
mine. I got a $25 discount.
And also, since now children anyone 5 and up basically can get a vaccination. This would apply to anyone who can legally receive the vaccination. So if people are bringing in their school-age children to it, they can bring their car. They don't have to get the vaccination from the health department. After they get their vaccination, they can come bring their vaccine card to the health department, and the health department can give them the card, as long as they live in Scotland.
And they're giving that, I assume, to the parent or guardian.
Yes.
So the question before us then is whether we wish to extend this, and if so, to what
Yes.
specific day?
March is the
I would say
recommendation.
March 31st, that should give us plenty of time, and then we would not need to extend additional funds.
I'll make a motion that we extend to March 31st.
Second.
Have a motion and a second.
You would just, it's your motion. I would maybe instead of go 3 days longer and go to the 4th of April, then that way it's our next meeting. So if we have to do it again, we won't have to have an in between.
Do it to April the 4th. That's our April meeting.
April meeting.
Yeah, it's only like 4 days later.
It could, are you willing to accept that as an amendment to your motion?
Yes.
You accept the second. With that in mind, deadline being April 4th, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Broadband project. Mr. Patterson, or is this, who are we looking to at this point?
A little bit of everybody around the room. With this, Mark was contacted recently with, what they're looking at doing is, applying for federal funds, primarily federal funds. But they're looking at expanding, broadband service into the southeast. They're building from the coast this way. They're already active in Robeson County, and I think they're looking to expand there and come into Scotland County. With that, they are looking for a resolution, a letter of support, a resolution of support from the Board of Commissioners to go for their, to support their funding application. But with this, they've stated that they're interested in working with us to develop a digital inclusion plan. The primary draft is already in the file, is in a Google file, which we all have access to. And with this, there would also be the recommendation that we've come up with a committee that can help look at, that is, guide broadband projects. We do have a representative from ATMC here also, if you have any specific questions. But the primary question is if the board would be willing to give them a letter of support for their, or resolution in support of their application. And then we'd look to actually begin to, we would create a broadband committee that would work with, that would be, we would seek representation from the county, the city, the school system, St. Andrews, the hospital, the primary major entities in the community, as well as we can structure that however other areas we wanted to go, but it would be looking for figuring out ways of matching up deployment possibilities for broadband.
Can you pull that map up on there, what's in our package? The one with the green, I assume is the proposed area.
Y'all mind if Chris comes up for us so he can answer questions or elaborate to y'all?
Yeah.
Chris, if you want to come up just to the podium, and if you'll.
If what pleases the board, I'd like to kind of fill in some holes in information. Fortunately, I was able to listen to your meeting this morning from ECC and some of the things that I heard being said and what we used. First, let me introduce myself, get started. My name is Chris Ward. I'm Director of Business Development at ATMC. We're the largest telephone or communications cooperative in the state of North Carolina. As of January the 1st, we are changing our doing business name as Focused Broadband. You'll see that on the resolution, because as we grow outside of our traditional cooperative area, more people will understand and know us through our fiber optics versus our origins as a telephone membership corporation. Since 2019, ATMC has been awarded over $42,250,000 in federal and state grants to expand broadband through state and federal initiatives. ATMC is contributing, in addition to that 42 million from the state and federal government, over 21.6 million. And these grants serve Robinson County, Columbus County, Duplin County, and Brunswick County.
Is it Richmond?
No. Robinson, Columbus, Duplin, and Brunswick. Yes, ma'am. We've also won multiple federal grants to serve Pender County and Columbus County. The Pender County Reconnect, which is what we're going to talk about for Scotland today, is over 28.9 million, and the Columbus County Reconnect is a little over 16 million. We are applying for a Reconnect grant, which is through the United States Department of Agriculture, for Scotland and Robinson County. We're looking at a large area, and I brought a map inside the digital inclusion plan. It just obviously talks about Scotland, and I'll get to the importance of the digital inclusion plan in just a minute. But the Reconnect that will serve Scotland and Robinson County will serve over 1,970 addresses and it will serve over 517 route miles throughout Robinson and Scotland County. I know y'all heard some information today about how expensive it is to build fiber optics. So that's 517 miles of fiber and over 8,000 addresses in Robinson and Scotland County. If we're just going to break out Scotland County, which is why I'm here today, we're talking about 1,970 addresses and about 165 miles of fiber in Scotland County. ATMC has already done all the background work through the Lumber River Council of Government. We use their survey. We use North Carolina DIT, and the Broadband Infrastructure Office had a statewide survey. We used all that information along with our own research to identify areas that are considered underserved based on the federal Reconnect grants criteria. So what we're asking today for is the resolution to support that. We will be applying for great grants, which are through the state of North Carolina in the future, which they should open up sometime next spring. That state budget that was recently approved and signed by the governor includes over $1 billion for broadband. There's essentially enough money available at the state and federal level to fix your internet issues in Scotland County. So companies like ATMC or anybody else that's willing to put up the money to get these grants, because when I say grants, the Reconnect, 25% of the money has to come from the person that's applying for it. So it's not 100% free money. The same thing with the great grants. Some of those are a 35% mix. Some of those may be up to a 50% mix based on the new laws and the new funding. But what I'm here today is to talk about the Reconnect, which is a federal grant. And then I'll probably be back later to talk about the great grant, because that will kind of fill in all the donut holes. The map that you have in front of you.
This one, this is the map you're talking about, the proposed.
Yeah, for Scotland.
For Scotland and, well, it's got Robinson on there too.
I've got a larger map of that if y'all want to keep that. But basically the information that was shared from the Lumber River Council of Government is the same information, and I'm colorblind. So when I look at maps, all I see is a big mass, but I can read the dots and those things. But that shows you where we came up with those 1,970 addresses. The main issue we have, just like they spoke about this morning, is the bad information from the current providers. If one house is served in a census block, they're all served. It's like the fox guarding the hen house. They don't want to spend money to give people high-speed internet, but they don't want anybody else to get money to give high-speed internet in those areas. So that's why it's important that you work with counties and have local surveys, because you guys through that survey have identified addresses where people say it's not available, even if CenturyLink or AT&T or somebody else said it is. So the digital inclusion plan will help us with great grants and anybody else. This is not just particular to ATMC. Any other company that applies for a great grant will get an extra point on their grant application if Scotland County has approved digital inclusion plan that's sent to the state of North Carolina Broadband Infrastructure Office. We've already had these approved with Bladen, Columbus, Pender, Hope, Robinson, working on Duplin, Onslow, and hopefully get you folks approved in the next few weeks, because we consider, or we think, the great grant application is probably going to open up after the first of the year. Maybe have a a 2-month window before that closes. So we're talking about a reconnect now. This application window closes in February. The digital inclusion plan will help anybody with the GREAT grant through the state of North Carolina, which right now it's just an estimate when that will open. We don't know for sure. So the largest amount of money will come from the reconnect. It's a very large project. We estimate it's almost $10,400,000 in Scotland County and another 20-some thousand in Robeson County. So altogether, our Scotland and Robeson projects will be over $32.5 million from the federal government. I'm not saying we're going to win because I can't guarantee that, but we do know everything's based on points. And so far, every grant we've ever applied for at the federal or state level, we've been awarded. There'll soon be a very large grant announced in Robeson County that we just got awarded that can't be announced formally yet until the government gets everything ready with their press release. But we're pretty good at what we do when it comes to grant applications. Obviously, Scotland County didn't get this way overnight. It'll take a long time to fix it, and it will take a lot of money. But now that the money's there, it's just companies that are willing to apply for those grants and get that money funded to fix this issue. And it's not an easy process. It requires thousands of hours of work to get this information. And you guys were ahead of the game when you contracted with the Lumber River Council of Government, because most counties don't have an entity that will help them do things like that. So I commend you for doing that. And I also commend the Lumber River Council of Government for sharing that information with us, because it was crucial basically to verify what we had already learned, because we have been working on this since earlier this year.
Now, do we have a map that shows where those 1,900 addresses are going to be? Is that?
That's these dots.
That's the dots that you see on there. I have a larger map version of that.
Show them the map, Kevin. It's got the different colors that says.
Yeah, that's the
basically
one.
Not inside Scotland County. Inside Scotland County, but not inside.
It was in our packet
Down
out,
there.
that one. Yeah, there you go.
And
then
by showing you guys this, anyone else that's applying for a grant can come in and steal this information. So we're taking a risk, but we have to have a resolution. So we want to make sure we're all working together, because this work is taking us months to put together.
that'll do it. You can just enlarge it from the bottom.
Yeah.
Move it over.
And I think the only difference in what you guys saw on the presentation this morning was if you go to the very far southwestern corner where Scotland butts up against Richmond, there's some areas over there, but that will probably be in our GREAT grant application. There'll still be a few pockets of unserved areas that we want to cover with the remaining funds of the state. The federal government obviously has a lot more money, so you go for the larger grants with the federal government, because with GREAT grants, you can't get anywhere close to $32 million on the project.
So the far east and south, that is the Hasty area, which is an opportunity zone. And then the far east is the Lumber-Maxon Airport and goes up to almost Waverly. Then the other large area that y'all see is 15501, and it V's out. I mean, that is the highest area that you cannot have high-speed numbers that the federal government requires you have to say it's broadband. And that goes all the way up beyond Deercroft. Deercroft is that dark green at the very top of it. They cannot go in Spectrum territory areas. So that's why they're not inside the city limits, because Spectrum already has it. You cannot seek grant fundings for broadband internet if that area already has broadband internet. That's what he was talking about you get some misleading information saying that my house qualifies, so therefore my whole neighborhood qualifies. Well, that's not accurate sometimes. You do notice that it does not have the Gibson area. It does not have all of Laura Hill, but that's where he was talking about. That would be the last mile or the next phase part of it. They will not be in competition with the city of Laurinburg with their fiber. The city of Laurinburg has no desire to provide fiber to the homes. They do provide fiber to some of the industries and, of course, to all the schools. But finding a company that wants to provide broadband to the home is the key to this, and a company that can come up with a match. Mark Ward had a entity company that had it, do I have 25-30% of a $15 million fee to put towards it? That's where, and it's not, just because you do a resolution saying you do this, that does not mean we go forward. We can always pull back.
No.
It doesn't cost you anything.
So that's what I wanted to know. What is the commitment?
There's no commitment from you guys other than the commitment to help us with the resolution and what we've done in other counties. I'll give Pender as an example because that's a $30 million project. Anywhere there's county-owned property to put like a switch, a 60 by 60 foot area, the county has established a partnership with us to give us easement on county property where it fits both our needs. I have no idea if any of this is going to come up, but that's really all we're asking for. There's really no skin in the game from the county. Now, the great grant opportunities, if you've got ARPA funds that you've dedicated to broadband expansion, then you're eligible for even more money from the state of North Carolina. The state of North Carolina wants counties to put some skin in the game to increase the level of funding they will get. That mean you have to do it. It just means if you do have those funds available and you earmark them for broadband, when we go apply for a great grant or any other provider, they will be eligible for more funding just because the county has a mechanism to contribute. What we're doing is not new to any provider in the area. It's just those providers are probably not willing to do the work. Any company, Spectrum, AT&T, anybody that already serves here and anybody that doesn't serve in Scotland County can apply for the same grants we're applying for. The difference is when you apply for a grant and win it, you have 5 years to complete the project. And we know that we have the financial stability and the manpower and the resources to complete projects, usually on time or well ahead of time and under budget. So that's why we feel comfortable applying for such a large grant in Robinson and Scotland, because we're going to be moving west, we're going to move north, we're going to go everywhere up to the Atlantic Ocean.
Whole state, I'm serious.
No, ma'am, not the whole state. That's a little ambitious at this point, but this is a gold rush. You will never see this in any of our lifetimes. And if you got fiber in the ground, then there's no other internet service that can beat that. And we are a symmetrical provider. Our lowest speed's 250 by 250. So we don't offer, I call it broadband salad. We're 2 meg down, 3 meg up. We don't do stuff like that. Everything's symmetrical and everything is over a fiber optic connection. So there's no copper wire anywhere in our network.
Mr. Ward, if you
Why
get,
wouldn't AT&T and Spectrum be doing this?
Because they are responsible to they're responsible to their shareholders. There's no return on investment here for the next quarterly shareholder meeting. And I'm being honest.
Yeah.
I made this comment plenty of times. They're about Wall Street. We're about Main Street. We don't have to have return on our investment in 2 to 3 years. Right. We do things a whole lot different. And honestly, if they can make money, they would already been out there. That's the only reason why a service is not out there. There's not enough people per mile to make it make sense.
if you win the grants you're talking about, as I understand it, you want to provide service to the unserved areas.
Yes.
Are you obligated to provide it to all unserved areas?
No, the grant only obligates us to the areas that are specified in the grant.
Or what areas are going to be excluded in Scotland County then? The city, the areas that are already served?
Anybody that currently already has broadband by the definition of the FCC, and that definition is a little different at the federal level for their grants versus the state level. But anybody that already has service, when this grant is turned in, they're not eligible. Now, we will build, if you see the blue lines, and I'm assuming it's blue, that's our fiber optic network. If we build to serve these areas, we're going to have to build through some areas that already have service to get to there. That's called middle mile. And then we can extend from there after the grant's over, but we can't use federal funds or state funds to serve anybody that's considered served.
My question relates more to, say, for example, when we have our water system, you get to a point where you don't have enough users to make it worthwhile to extend the water system.
Right.
Are you obligated to extend whatever you're doing?
That's a great question. And let me tell you about a program we have, because speaking about water lines, I live in rural Columbus County and just got county water. The way we do our extensions, we serve anybody within 1,000 feet from the end of the line at no cost. And then after that, there's a certain cost that the customer has to pay or the business or whatever. But if there's a house every 1,000 feet, we could keep extending to the end of that road. But we can't go outside of that area because the grant will be audited by the USDA. So we literally have to show every address that was in the application and stop where that, because there can't be use of funds outside of that grant.
So the addresses that are included within the application are the
Mhm.
ones that you will serve, and then beyond that is subject to whatever you.
Subject to the 1,000-foot extension and the great grant application window, because you got to realize you can't spend all this money in 1 year. The Reconnect project is, 1.2 billion over 2 years. And then the great grants is $1 billion. So that's probably going to be over multiple years in the state of North Carolina. They won't have enough people apply for money to spend all that money in 1 year. So this is going to be a multi-step process. The only reason why we're here in front of you to talk about the Reconnect is because that comes first. The digital inclusion plan is really about the great grants. That's what helps you at the state level.
How confident are you in that number of 1970 households? How was that determined?
Through GIS information and through Form 477 information, tax, land records, everything that is available in the public domain.
Not the surveys that were done, because
Well, the surveys were really done to pinpoint areas that were questionable. Some areas based on 477 information from the FCC said served. If that person responded in that survey saying they live at this address, but they don't have service available, then that's where those houses were added or not added. You're saying the survey was not accurate in some cases?
it wasn't complete, yeah.
Yep. Well,
1970 are households that don't have access, because you're going to have households that have access but have not.
Yeah.
are-
and what we mean is they don't have access to a provider that even if they don't have it, they could call up and get it. And part of that with the digital inclusion plan is not just availability, but affordability, because there's tons of federal, and then there'll be some state programs. And then we offer lifeline assistance to make internet, as low as $20 a month. And people pay a lot more than that for cell phones or whatever. So if you have it out there and you build it and nobody can afford it, you might as well not have it.
Well, he made in that earlier presentation, the Form 477, and he picked on Windstream, but said that
It's not.
They're not. So it's possible that area could be bigger if Windstream's numbers were true.
It is.
So how do you get to true?
It's very convoluted right now because the federal government is trying to replace their broadband map. That's what everybody goes back to, that Form 477 data. They're getting information directly from people's IP addresses and from people's computers when they go to certain websites to find out download and upload on particular addresses for customers. That won't happen anytime soon. The money is available now. So while we know there are problems currently, we can only go with the information we have, even if we know it's wrong. But once again, that's where the survey comes in, because where I live in Columbus County, CenturyLink said they had DSL available up to 60 meg, and that's not even a possibility unless you're right next to the central office. So we had to have people sign affidavits, and the USDA has enough employees, they call them field representatives. They can literally go to some of these houses and ask the people and get on a computer there and check it themselves. At the state level, they don't get that granular, but hopefully the information is as close to correct as we can get it at this time, knowing that there's two opposing forces here. The current service provider is going to lose customers. Even if they're providing bad service, they've still got customers. So it behooves them to keep competition out. And that's all this Form 477 map battle is over, accurate information.
So chances are that area is much larger.
It should be.
Yeah.
It will be. And a lot of that, and I don't know, looking at this map, I'm not familiar with the density of the population. Obviously, those are the more rural areas. But as you get closer to town in some places, I'm sure Spectrum or whoever may run a line down the main road, but they don't go off the side roads, and those houses are still considered served because they have service on the main road. We run into that all the time, and we try to delineate that with survey information.
Could it be a situation where you run all this out with the federal program, but then that program is complete? I'm in a neighborhood of 50 houses, 2,000 feet away.
Yep. That's when I would come speak to your neighborhood of 50 people and have a meeting and ask how many people are interested in it. If we get a certain number of people willing to take service, then we would extend that at that length. 2,000 feet is really not a lot when you're looking at, 500 some miles of fiber.
But with the federal grant, you just can't go outside that grant.
No, you literally get audited. So they send people down here to check not only your books, but check your plant in the field. So you have to make it a hard stop where that line says that the grant applies.
Yes, I've got a question for you, but I think. Yeah, I think I'm a kind of go what Attorney Johnson had asked. Yes, that is the area that Owen will apply for, but he might go right by a road that has 3 houses to the left on that road. Those 3 houses will not be served by this grant. But the state will have some finish line grants that once we have fiber there, that's when he was talking about the great grants and other grants, that they will then be able to apply for and say, okay, we put this fiber optic in Scotland County and Robinson County. We know we were not able to go to these roads because the grant would not allow us. We want to seek the state funding now to be able to run a mile of fiber for 3 houses, which costs $63,000 a mile. That's when they would apply for that. So there are going to be some residents near that fiber's going to go right by, and they're not going to get it today.
And that's an excellent point, because with the digital inclusion plan, the state will take information from the county. If Scotland County government reports these addresses are unserved, they will take that at face value. If we report it, they won't, it's not verified. So working directly with counties, if you identify those areas and you acknowledge that they're not served, that's just as good as it being on the map as not served.
Chris, you realize that you are asking us for a resolution in support of your application.
In support of our application, nothing else.
You realize that we are likely to have other providers coming before us.
Yeah, they definitely will now that they've seen our map.
What other providers would they do?
I'll be honest with you. Spectrum has won a few local, like a great grant and stuff. A lot of them, like you heard earlier, have won RDOF funds, which that's over a 10-year period. So that's really not even realistic to talk about today. But nothing stops any of them. We've seen CenturyLink do it in some of their areas that maybe have a larger potential of customers, areas that are growing, but not quite there yet. But nothing, all those, Windstream, AT&T, Spectrum, CenturyLink, anybody can apply for this. But the people that report to Wall Street more than likely won't take down projects like this just because it's too big of an area and too long of a payback.
Are there any other cooperatives in North Carolina doing this?
There's quite a few cooperatives, and they're mostly doing it within their service county. We're one of the few cooperatives outside of Wilkes that goes outside of our area and has expanded to multiple counties. The difference between what we're doing and what some of those cooperatives are doing, we're not asking for money. We're using our own resources. We are financially stable, where if we spend $250,000 of manpower to get a grant and don't win it, while that's a bad investment for us, we know there's a return on that eventually. A lot of companies can't do this without some type of monetary assistance.
And y'all are based in Brunswick County?
Yes, ma'am. We're based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Ocean Isle, Sunset, Leland, that area. And we are very fortunate because Brunswick is one of the fastest growing counties in North Carolina. But Columbus County right next door, we started doing them in 2011. Started moving into Robinson County last year, huge projects in Pender County. In our business, if you're not growing, you're dying. So we're growing, especially while there's money available.
I think you addressed this earlier, but I want to make sure I understand it. When we look at this map, of course, I'm like you, I don't know what I'm looking at really, but I do know that I heard you all say Laurel Hill, Gibson, those areas are not really included. But I understand you to say that when the great grants come with the state, they be included in that particular.
Yeah, what our plan is, and I don't have anything I can share with you other than what I can tell you, because once again, it's highly competitive. But this is the most bang for your buck when it comes to a federal. We've studied Scotland and Robinson County every which way from Sunday, and we feel like this is a great application because we know how many points we'll get, and we know how many points it takes to win. All grant applications are based on points. So we literally have proprietary software that runs all kinds of different formulations. Those other areas are smaller pockets. Federal government's not going to award a grant for $1 million. They won't spend as much money as quickly as possible and get a good headline. That's where the state funds come in. And I can't tell you those addresses or those townships or whatever will be served in the great grant. I can just tell you that with this and what we've planned for the great grant, it should take care of all the known underserved areas. And then the areas like we talked about where people that, you know, extend to later, those 1 or 2 houses that are not on the main line, and those things will be on a case by case basis. But we feel very confident. Like I said, can't guarantee we'll win it, but we do feel like what we've shown you today is an excellent application.
And I ask that not just for you, but for our commissioners. I know that when we were having to do remote learning kids up in Marston, Wagram, those were the ones who really struggled the most with not having. Miss Betty got beat up, Old 100, you know, those folks.
And
really,
some
really struggled.
of those areas probably they're victims of that 477 map where the companies say they serve people, but they
They're
don't.
not.
And that's why it's important now to get the data out and the survey information to actually prove that those addresses aren't served.
So am I hearing that the state just supplements only after the feds have made a commitment?
No. What you're hearing me tell you is we can't apply for anything at the state level because the application's not open. The federal application window is open. The federal application limits awards maybe up to 30 million, or I don't know what that dollar amount is. It's a large amount, where the state is up to 2 million per project. So I would have to put in 15 different projects from the state, and they're only going to award 1 or 2 per county. So that would be just be a waste of our time. So the reconnect comes first just because their window's open and because they have the largest pot of funds available and can make a project, a larger project, they can make that come to a realization. That's the only reason why we're going to reconnect for the larger area.
Are you finished in the other counties besides Robinson and Scotland?
We're not finished anywhere.
Oh, okay.
We're constantly building. When COVID hit, everybody found out if you don't have internet, you might as well not have water and lights, because you can't send the kid home with a brand new Chromebook and tell them to do their homework when they don't have internet. And technically, you shouldn't tell somebody they got to spend all day at Wi-Fi spot at a library or McDonald's to do because somebody's got to work. An 8-year-old kid's not going to sit in the car for 7 hours. So we learned it was a very difficult process, but we did learn that broadband is essential. And for years, we've treated it that way as a company, but most people don't treat it that way because they never had a situation like that. It's an essential utility now. And what we're doing with fiber is not anything that's going to be out of style, it's not going to be a technology that dies in 50 years like copper, DSL, and then or cable service. Once you have fiber optics in the ground, you just change electronics on either end because it's speed of light. It's just laser shooting light down the line that goes to a house or a business.
So have y'all crossed the river?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions?
I do have one. So our resolution is, you're asking us to state what?
It's in support of our project because here's what's happening. When we go to the federal government, we have to prove that people in this community think this is a good idea. Otherwise, they won't give the money. So I've got Scotland County Schools. We're hoping to get the commissioners. We've got people from St. Andrews University. We've got people from RCC. We've contacted most of the local state and federal government officials and got their letters of support. We got letters of support from the North Carolina Secretary of Commerce, North Carolina Secretary of Agriculture, North Carolina Governor, Lieutenant Governor. We've done all that work. Now we just need to get this to put in with the application because we do know applications will be better received if you've got all the local dignitaries in that.
I'm having technical issues.
County resolutions in hand yet?
I have letters of support for Scotland. Yes, ma'am.
Jason
Yes, ma'am.
there's one in our package. If Jason wants to read that resolution.
And I think Dr. Graham mentioned this morning.
I think Dr. Grant said, you said
So
you already have one from.
Yeah. They were very quick to respond because they obviously understood that there's still lots of problems with their students not having access to high-speed internet.
No, very honestly, I think that's one of our
Biggest concern.
What about the healthcare system?
Well, fortunately, most hospitals are located in cities, so they don't have to worry about internet service. Now, there may be some rural clinics in these areas that we serve, but when you ask about the healthcare system, it's not so much the office that needs the internet, it's the customer at house that needs to send information from their pacemaker or do an online meeting with their doctor. Because most of my doctor's appointments now are through a Zoom meeting, unless they have to do blood work or stuff like that. I just have a conversation with my doctor on my computer. And that's the way this is going when it comes to healthcare, especially to keep costs down.
Scotland Healthcare will do all that. And Richmond Community College is already done.
Yep. Yeah, we're working closely. I want to thank Mark for what he's done with us because anytime you grow into an outside area, people that's never seen us or heard of us before look at us and wonder if we're actually going to do what we say we're going to do. I provide references. The Pender County commissioners, when we met them 2 years ago, did not believe a thing we said because everybody came to them, asked for hundreds of thousands of dollars to do an application. Year and a half later, the Secretary of Agriculture is in Pender County announcing a $30 million project. So we're only here to help the county of Scotland and not really asking for anything other than your support.
So do we need somebody to read it or just make the motion to?
I think we all can read it, yeah.
Yeah.
I offer a motion that we, do this resolution in support of.
Motion from Commissioner Gibson,
Second.
second by, Commissioner Goldston. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Thank you, Mr. Ward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. And Chris, I'm a customer of yours in Brunswick County.
Yeah, make sure my bill down
Does
in
any,
Olden Beach don't get affected.
does anybody need a business card? I've got a handful if you have questions or anything you want to talk about or anything.
I would
You
like
saw
to,
it, Jason.
I'd like to have one just to go with my
You gotta
file.
place it home.
And when we signed up for AT&T at Brunswick.
I'll just leave them right there.
Yeah,
I
AT&T
don't know
does
how
all
many
the
years
internet,
ago, but it was
phone
the
and
best thing
everything
we
down
ever
there.
done. Unreal.
Where is your place?
The difference between our company and anybody
On the
else,
supply
technology is
side.
great, but it's the people you work with. If you have a problem, when you have my phone number, I actually work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and I'll make sure somebody takes care of it.
I love.
I've been a
calling somebody.
Spectrum customer about all my life where I live. I don't have a contact with them because I call a call center and it could be anywhere in the United States. So we're local people, even though we're from Brunswick, we will treat Scotland just like our customers, and we'll have stores over this way toward Robinson and Scotland County. We'll hire employees from this county. We want to do everything based out of Scotland County for Scotland County residents.
Are you in New Hanover County?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statutes 143, 318, self-attorney employed and retained by the public body in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the public body.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Ivy, second by Commissioner McCall. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Ayes have it.